Hi, my name's Bailey Hanna, and I'm the author of the Wells Ranch series, a spicy cowboy romance series set in rural British Columbia.
Welcome to Love Letters and Books, a podcast for anyone who loves a good story. I'm your host, Casey, and this week I am sitting down with author Bailey Hanna. She is the best-selling author of the Wells Ranch series, a spicy cowboy romance filled with heartfelt stories and an abundance of hope and healing. We'll discuss her books Alive in Wells, Seeing Red, and her latest book, Change of Heart, a swoony second chance romance which spotlights the realities of the sandwich generation, balancing self-care with caregiving. Bailey also offers us a teaser for her upcoming book, a single mom romance called At Whit's End. We'll discuss why Bailey writes 30-something characters and the life-changing messages her books inspire in readers. If you crave a good cowboy romance with memorable characters, emotional depth, soulmates, and happily ever afters, this is the episode for you. And make sure to stay with us to the very end as Bailey will share a beautiful love letter to her readers. Bailey, welcome to the Love Letters and Books podcast. I am so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. It's funny, as we're sitting down to record this, I have just finished your latest book, Change of Heart, and I am still very much in the kind of afterglow / high of Denver and Blair and this incredible world of Wells Ranch. So I would love to just start there. Can you tell us about this beautiful book that you just put out and why this story was important to tell and why these characters needed their stories told?
Well, they needed their stories told because they would not stop talking in my brain until I told their stories. I kind of really just think that I am like the vessel and their stories come to me and then I have to just write them. Like that is just my job. And so I don't even plot or anything. Things just kind of come to me. But Wells Ranch is really based on I grew up in small town British Columbia. And so that is where Wells Ranch, which is fictional, but it's based and I've pulled a lot of my favorite places and a lot of things from my favorite people or from people that I've met around here, and that's all kind of just meshed together in my brain. And then it came up with this entire world while I was camping at a cattle ranch in BC, actually. So, and then I came home and it just, yeah, like I said, I just feel like the vessel for the stories and I just have to sit down and tell them.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, this was a long and winding and very beautiful, layered second chance love story between Denver and Blair. Can you tell us a little bit about their dynamic and who they are as characters?
Yeah. So for anybody who hasn't read it, Denver is the youngest of the three brothers who runs Wells Ranch. And Blair came into his life when they were 13 because she wanted to get into barrel racing and his mom was teaching her. And at first he was kind of like, oh, I have to hang out with this girl all the time now. Like, typical 13-year-old boy things. But over the course of that first summer, and you see it in flashbacks throughout the story, it's a dual timeline. They become friends. And then as they get a little bit older, that becomes more than friends. And then they go through a lot of trauma together in their teen years. And that just really cements that bond forever. So when Blair ends up having to come back 14 years later because her mom has an Alzheimer's diagnosis, they kind of just immediately, as much as she doesn't want it to happen, because she's like, no, no, that was my past. That's not what I came back to town for. He's all in from day one. He knows. He's like, that's my person. That's my girl. And she gives in pretty quickly because, like I said, there's just that bond between them and there's no breaking it. They are definitely, obviously, all of my characters feel like soulmates to me, but they are definitely the soulmates for me.
Oh, that was so beautiful. And I loved learning more about them because obviously we've been introduced to them in the previous books, and
Yeah.
you're so curious about this dynamic and why did she leave and why have they been apart for so long. So it was great to see it come together. It was such a
Yeah.
beautiful story. And one of the things that I've noticed in your writing, and especially in this book, is that you are touching on some really challenging topics that affect real people. And it's happening in this beautiful world that you've created. And so, even in this last book, you are talking to almost the sandwich generation that is in that position where they're focused on themselves, their health, their wellness, their love life, their career. They're thinking about having a family or they do have a young family, but then they're also in the position of being a caretaker. And it's a pretty intense position to be in, but it's often overlooked. And you really highlighted how overwhelming it can be for someone in Blair's story and what it's like to be a part of a community that holds you and lifts you up and wants the best for you. Can you touch on that aspect of your writing a little bit? Because I've noticed that your characters are really going through some very relatable things
Yeah.
and what it's like as a reader, to read this and to be there and to see it unfold so beautifully. I'd just love to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, like I said, I really feel like the vessel, so they feel like real people to me, and real people are layered. There's more than meets the eye. There's things going on behind the scenes, and when I'm writing the stories, I'm always also kind of trying to think about that. Like, what is somebody who has been through this trauma? How might they react versus somebody who hasn't been through that trauma? So we see a lot of that in Change of Heart, and we see where the trauma comes from, but that's not always the case. So, in my second book in the series, Seeing Red, a lot of their actions and reactions are based on all of that trauma that I've layered into their backstories. And even though we don't see that, I'm still being mindful of all of that trauma that they have every time that they are reacting or acting in a situation. So, it's really just, yeah, about layering all of that in and pulling things and pulling experiences from people's lives who I know and just meshing it together, and they all feel like real people to me, so it's easy.
And speaking of seeing red, one of the things that stood out to me was you were very like elegantly touching on these traumas that people experience where sometimes when we're adults and we're in the real world, the response can be just get over it. Just
Yeah,
move on, just muscle
yeah,
through it, just pull it together. And you were creating this situation, this beautiful, unlikely relationship dynamic where these traumas rise to the surface, not even so much because they're triggered, but because it was an opportunity to change and to share and connect with someone and to sort of
yeah,
release the tension a little bit and say, yeah, this thing did happen to me. And even though I'm an adult and I'm fine now, it's still very much with me. It's in my body,
exactly.
it's in my mind, it's in my heart. So I would love to maybe just talk about that in Seeing Red because there were some very strong
Mhm.
parallels between the two main characters, right? They had different upbringings, but they
Yeah,
had some of those same wounds. So what was that
totally.
in writing their relationship, which I loved, by the way. I loved their dynamic. So
Oh, I love to hear that. People are very hard, especially on Cassidy from that
really?
book, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're not seeing all of the trauma that she's been through during her life, which is, her mom being in and out of her life and then gone entirely when she became a teenager. And so she was raised by a single dad who owns a bar. So she basically grew up in this small town dive bar, which that in and of itself, like I can't imagine the things that she might have experienced hanging around there all the time. Like that's not exactly a normal quote unquote upbringing. And Red grew up in the same town, came from an abusive home. His dad was abusive. They were basically run out of town when he was a teenager. So they definitely both struggle with a lot of fears about growing up to be like their parents. And that is something that, even though they're both now in their 30s, they've never really had to face until now because Seeing Red is an accidental pregnancy trope book.
Mhm.
So now all of a sudden they're having a baby together, and they've known each other forever, but they weren't in a relationship. This was a one night stand. And so it's seeing their relationship bloom as they're kind of slowly opening up to each other and learning that there's more than meets the eye, because to her, she's always just seen Red as that troublemaking kid. And then when he became an adult, he was in her dad's bar all the time and he was getting into fights and causing problems. And he sees her as like the town goody two shoes, because when she was a teenager, she wasn't dating, she wasn't going out to parties, she wasn't doing any of that stuff. But then as they start to slowly become friends, they just learn more about each other. And I think that's the really beautiful thing, that all of a sudden they have this moment of like, oh, you're so much more. Like,
Yeah.
there's one point where Red is like, I've known her for basically my entire life, but I never really knew her. And now I do. So, yeah,
What a
that's what I
beautiful
love
lesson.
about
I
them
mean,
so much.
in life in general, but definitely in the book,
Yeah.
it definitely stood out. And it's funny, right before I hopped on this recording with you, I was talking to a
Mhm.
coworker and we were talking about how the world almost makes no space for women to be uncomfortable or to acknowledge their discomfort or to have
Absolutely.
fear because it's almost like this acceptable baseline. And it's like, well, what's the hesitation? What's your problem? And it's like, I know that you're very comfortable with me being uncomfortable, but maybe I
Yeah.
need a second. And it's so interesting when you're mentioning the reaction to Cassidy, which I was a little surprised by because I loved her. I thought it sounded
Like,
so
I
natural. Like
love her
she's
so much.
she's terrified. She has all of these big life changes in,
Yeah.
2 seconds her life is turned around, and to hesitate and to wonder and to take everything into consideration and say, I don't want to repeat the past. I want a bigger future for myself, for my child, for my family. I want all of these things, and to take time. And by the way, 9 months of pregnancy is not that long of
No,
time to figure that
no.
out. So I feel
It
like
goes
we
by
might be being a little,
fast.
exactly, we might be being a little tough on her. But no,
Absolutely.
I just thought it was so beautiful how some of those things that were almost encouraged to ignore, they were able to work out together. And I thought one of the other things that you said that stood out was as they were building their friendship,
Yeah.
because yes, there's an attraction, but then they had to build their friendship together in order to figure out, are we doing this life together? How are we going to be
Mhm.
co-parents? How are we going to be friends moving forward? So it was just so beautiful. And I think, again, something that stood out to me as a reader is how you did weave through their trauma in a way
Mhm.
that we were seeing it through their eyes as an adult, and how
Yeah.
they had reflected on their experience versus, hi, I'm in it right now and I'm 12 years old and this is happening. It was them looking back and sharing it. So beautiful. So your characters have some life under their belt, which is another
Yes.
important
Yeah.
topic that I wanted to bring up with you, and the choice to write about people at this stage of life. Why does that
Yeah.
appeal to you?
A big part of it is because I want them to have all of these years of experience and trauma, and some of them have maybe worked through that trauma a little better than others, and it just gives so much more room for life experiences and for maturity. Plus, I also think that we're seeing more and more of it now in romance, but romance is still very much skewed towards under 25-year-old main characters, and especially female main characters. Like, sometimes we'll see a younger FMC and then a much older MMC, like a male main character, but yeah, for the most part, it's still just very, very young, and that is a completely different stage of life, and especially in the world that we live in now. Like, I think it's very, very normal to not meet your person until you're older and to not care. Like, it's not the end of the world for any of these people that they are in their early 30s and they haven't gotten married and settled down, or at least not all of them. Like Jackson and Kate, they did meet their person right away and they got married young and they had kids in their 20s and all of that. But so I kind of like to show a little bit of everything, and their story is gonna happen in present day, so they're older as well. But, yeah, I think we just need more of it, and like I said, it shows so much more of their life experiences. And it also, I think, is I've had so many messages from people who are in their 30s, and especially people who have been through things like an abusive relationship in their 20s and whatever, and it's like gives them a little bit of hope that life just doesn't magically end when you turn 25 or 30 or whatever.
Oh, that's so important and so beautiful. And it very much comes through in your writing as, a fan and a reader, somebody who devours your books. That's definitely a message that comes through. And while I always love those younger love stories, because some of us didn't have sweet, nice, happy, young experiences when we're young. So it's
Yeah.
so fun to read those stories. I do think it is really important to highlight these stories throughout the lifespan and what it's like to fall in love while you're also making big life decisions and you're taking into account your career and what you want in your family and all of those things. So
Yeah.
it comes through so beautifully in your writing. And it's interesting because I was introduced to you through your book, Alive and Wells, which I just could not put this book down. I ate it up. I loved absolutely everything about it. But one of the things that stood out to me so much was when I closed the book, I thought to myself, someone is going to read this book and save and change their life because you were
Yeah.
talking about a really serious topic and you're talking about it in such a way that clarifies that sometimes domestic violence and abuse looks a little bit different than everyone tells us it does. And we don't have to wait till that nth degree when, all hope is lost. Your main character makes a decision that is best for herself. And someone in her life could look at it and say, that wasn't that bad, which sometimes
Yeah.
happens to people in those situations. And it's so unfortunate. But she made this choice, uproots her life. And I would love to talk about that book. What was it like for you to write that book? And then what has the reaction been since?
It was scary, especially as my debut novel. I wrote the first few chapters, which it starts out really heavy. It starts out with her still in that relationship the night that she decides to leave. And I didn't know how people would react to it. And I was also very worried about romanticizing the abuse, which is what a lot of people accuse many other books. There's lots of books out there
Mhm.
that are romance books or women's fiction with a romance subplot that cover some form of domestic abuse. And people will be like, oh, it was romanticizing it and all of that. So I was very nervous, very, very nervous. But I had a couple of really wonderful women who were open about their own experiences, and they let me sort of use that. And they also read the first few chapters just because I was like, I want to tell this in a very real and raw way. But I also am aware that it's a romance novel and I don't want to immediately turn off every single reader as soon as they open it. So yeah, I was nervous to jump in. Maybe I should have jumped in with a little light rom-com and then got into some deeper stuff, but that was the story that was begging to be told, so I just went for it, and I'm so glad that I did. I'm so, so glad that I did. Like, that book absolutely changed my life in so many ways. The subject matter has brought me friends because their initial message to me was telling me how much hope it gave them or how touching it was or how much they could relate with Cecily because they had been through something similar to that. And I've had women get tattoos for that book because of the hope it's given them. I had a woman a while ago send me a message that I screenshotted and I was like, I'm keeping this forever because she told me that that's what gave her the strength to leave. And part of it was because it was that like sort of relationship where people would say, "Oh, it's not that bad."
Yeah.
And even Cecily in the moment, the night that she's leaving, she has those thoughts of like, "Well, maybe it wasn't actually that bad. Like maybe I'm overreacting." And so I think that part specifically has affected a lot of the women who have read it and been like, "Wait, this feels a little bit too much like my relationship right now. That's not good. Like maybe this is actually as bad and maybe I'm not overreacting." And then they've been able to get out or they've been able to find a therapist and start working towards getting out or whatever it is. So that's like means so much more to me than anything else because I really just published this book to say that I had published a book. It didn't even dawn on me that people would necessarily read it, never mind read it and have their lives be changed because of it. Like, that is the wildest thing to me.
Oh, it has to be so mind-blowing, and
It is.
I think it right? And I think it really speaks to the fact that stories are important. We heal, we connect for thousands of years. That's how we learn lessons. And as I was reading your book, I was just thinking about the generations of women prior who did not have that type of exposure, where they would go through things and feel very isolated or feel like they couldn't tell anyone or talk to anyone. And I feel like that's one of the powerful things about books in general, but also romance books, where that can come through. Yes, there's this beautiful love story. And
Yeah.
by the way, I loved their love story. The two of them are my favorite.
I
But
love
there's also this learning and wisdom that comes through in your writing. And it's so important to share that. And when we share our stories, we're helping the person next to us who doesn't feel like they can share their story. So that's what I was getting from what you had touched on in that book. And then I was also thinking, because you briefly just touched on this on your process, but how do you create that safe space, that container for your reader when you are touching on some challenging topics, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's chronic illness, whether it's being a caregiver and taking care of someone else? What goes into that for you? How do you almost create those healthy boundaries and that space for the reader to immerse themselves, to still get lost in your story? And I never want to leave Wells Ranch. Like, I
Yeah.
absolutely love it. But
Yeah.
how do you create that for them?
I think part of it is it's the magic of the romance genre. I saw Kennedy Ryan say once that romance feels like this, it's a really safe sort of sandbox where you can get really deep into a lot of very heavy topics, because even if the reader doesn't necessarily realize it, subconsciously they know that this book is going to end in a happy ever after. Things are going to be good in the end. And that's so different than every other genre where you don't know. All of a sudden, the main character could die three-quarters of the way through,
Yeah.
and you're just going to be crushed. But in romance, no matter how much hardship the main characters go through during the novel, you know that by the end, it's all going to be tied together and everybody's going to be happy and in a good place. So just knowing that in the back of your mind as you're reading it kind of makes this a really safe space to get into those hard topics. And then as for me personally, when I'm writing the really hard stuff, and I also do this for myself because it's hard for myself to write these,
Yeah.
like change of heart, there was a few times where I had to step away because I was sobbing so hard I couldn't see my computer screen. But I try to add in some moments of levity because that's also real life too, right? Like even when things are going really hard, sometimes something really funny is going to happen and everyone's going to just it doesn't matter how sad you are. Someone that you love could be literally dying, which I'm not going to spoil anything, but I mean that does happen in one of my books, and then something happens and everyone just starts laughing.
Yeah.
And that's real, and I think that that kind of like eases the tension. Obviously, it's still a really intense moment, but it's just enough that you can, like, take a quick little breath and then get back into it.
Oh, absolutely. And
Mhm.
it's interesting how there's so much community in your books.
Yeah.
Even people who initially had been isolated. So let's take Cecily, for example. We enter into Alive and Wells, and she's in this complicated situation, but she had previously reached out to another woman for support, and that woman sort of brings her into the fold. So I would love to touch on not just the found family trope, but what you think about people being in relationship in community with visibility, with connection, with not just focusing on one person, but being part of a community, because it's very much what happens at Wells Ranch. It's not just you and your
It
love
is.
interest, it's you at the big dinner table with everyone else. And why was
Yeah.
that such an important part of your writing?
Well, especially for Cecily, that felt very, very important because she hadn't had that. The relationship that she had been in, he had very much isolated her from her own family, her friends, typical typical abusive relationship type things. And so she wasn't used to that. She was used to having to handle everything just by herself or not handle it. So it just felt really important that she had that community. And so once that community was already kind of built, then it just became so much easier to bring everybody in the following books into it as well. And it just became this big, huge family. And I also think that she, like, not only would she not have healed, but I don't think she would have found love if she hadn't had that community. And that's a big part of why so many people ask, like, well, were Kate and Jackson already married in the first book? Like, they're already a long-term established couple. And a big part of that was because I wanted Cecily to have some more like feminine energy around her. So she wasn't just at this cattle ranch with a whole bunch of men, because that probably wouldn't have been very healing for her. She would have
Yeah.
just been scared permanently. So to have that energy and to have sort of that, not a goalpost, but something that you can look at and be like, okay, see, that's a healthy, loving
Mm.
marriage. And being surrounded by that every day just would have been so helpful for her and Austin as they start to kind of develop their own relationship.
Oh, so powerful. And it really
Yeah,
comes through in your writing as everyone sort of enters into this space where they're almost on stage, but it's a really gentle stage with people who want the best for them and are rooting for them basically throughout the entire story. Um,
absolutely.
One of the other interesting things is it's taking place in community is that there's an intergenerational aspect of this series that you've woven through where there was a big love story for the matriarch and the patriarch who started this family, and that ended in a really sad
Yeah.
way. And then we are witnessing what happens with someone's broken heart and how that travels through generations and how people are responding or choosing to respond or deal with that or show up or incorporate those lessons into their own life. So, why was that an important part of this series? And why is that woven throughout all the books where we're seeing how Austin has a very different response to Denver, to their father's choices?
Yeah. So again, it's really just about them feeling like real people, and I want them to feel real and relatable, and not everybody's going to respond to trauma in the same way. So like I said earlier about every way that they act or react, I'm always thinking about all of the things that happened to them when they were younger and how that might be affecting the way that they're responding now. And I think that's also been the fun thing about each book. And you're seeing now all of a sudden, we've seen Denver as just the goofy, he's always making a joke about every single situation, doesn't take life seriously, doesn't take relationships seriously, none of that. And then now that we've had his book, so many people have been like, "Oh, I really wasn't expecting that." That, like, the most golden retriever, young brother, like, that's all just a trauma response to all of the things that have happened to him. And a big part of that was that even when he was a teenager and before all of his family falling apart, he was the goofy one, and he just really leaned extra hard into that
Yeah.
afterwards because he was like, "This is my role in my family now." Jackson's just kind of quiet, reserved, keeping to himself. Austin is angry at the world. So I'm going to try and diffuse this situation in the only way that I really know how, which is to be funny because I already know that I'm good at that. And that's kind of the way real people work too, right? They all handle things completely differently based on their role in the family that they already had, the other trauma that's going on. Like, Denver went through it there for about a year of his life.
Oh my
So
God.
he's just
My babies. Like, you want to hug these
right?
characters. Yeah.
And it's
They've,
all just a mask because he's like,
yeah.
they have their own shit going on and I'm not going to bother them with that.
Yeah.
So I'll just act funny and then I'll go deal with it in my own way on my own time when they're not around. And then when Blair comes back and he lets her in, it's really like a turning point in their relationship.
Yeah. It's something that I notice that you're doing for each of the characters. It's almost like the thing that helps them survive is not what helps them thrive. So even Austin just taking all that responsibility on his shoulders and just
Yeah.
muscling through everything and just being kind of like that angry, everyone get away from me. That helped him be successful. It helped him save his family and take care of that. But does it help you build the life you want? No, even Red,
Exactly.
right? Just embracing this persona that's been handed down through almost a legacy from his
Yeah.
father and saying, all right, so I can survive that way, but I'm not going to thrive. And then, of course, what you just shared about Denver. And that's so beautiful and relatable, and obviously a huge lesson in there for the readers,
Yeah.
and such a beautiful story. So I love
Yeah.
that you've packaged it that way. Well, you have left us with your next book that I can't wait for. So, is there
Yes.
anything that you can tell us about At Wit's End?
Yeah. So speaking of, siblings and having very different responses to the
Yeah.
things that they went through as they were growing up, we have Blair's sister. So Blair is Denver's second chance love. Her sister went through some pretty similar things as a teenager to Blair, but it ended completely differently. She went a different route than Blair, made different choices. So she's Blair's younger sister. She has a 10-year-old son. She's a single mom. And he's been getting into a lot of trouble. Again, we're seeing the kid, you know, act and react to a lot of the trauma that he's already gone through in his very short 10 years. And because he's been getting into trouble, she's stressed. She can't handle it all. Blair, if you've read Change of Heart, she's very much like, don't worry, I'll just put that on my shoulders too. It's fine. So she kind of does that, but then it's too much for her too.
Yeah.
So part of her growth and learning in her own book is being able to give that to somebody else, let somebody else help her with her heavy loads. And so we see in Change of Heart that Denver asks one of the other ranch hands to kind of take this kid under his wing, give him some chores to do on the ranch. And that is Colt, arguably the goofiest, biggest golden retriever cowboy at the ranch. And so he takes this 10-year-old under his wing and then falls in love with Whit in the process.
Oh, I can't wait. So when does that come out? Not to rush you, because I know you
Yeah.
just put out your your
No, it's
last
all
book,
good. It's
but
all good. It comes out December 2nd, so
oh my
not too
gosh,
much
I
longer
can't
to wait.
wait. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, that's really exciting. I can't wait for that one. I'm so into this series, and I have a good friend, former coworker, who reads just as much as I do, and we talk all the time about how books like yours set in these beautiful worlds that we just would move into in a heartbeat. It's like that's
Yes.
our safe space. That's our healing space at
Yeah.
the end of a really hard day or a really hard week. I'm like, I'm just gonna kind of go to this beautiful Canadian ranch and get lost in the story. So thank you so much for sharing that. But I would love to
Yeah.
hear from you. What do you most want readers to take away or feel when they close one of your books? What is your biggest hope?
My biggest hope is that they have hope at the end of it, that anything that they might have gone through in the past or are currently going through, that that's not all of who they are. It's just a small part, and they can grow and change, and they can find love if they want to find love. They can find community, and that there's just hope by the end of it, that all of that stuff, it matters, but it's not the only thing that matters. It's not the only thing that makes them who they are.
Oh, well, I definitely felt that. So it's
Good.
working. No, it
Perfect. Then
definitely
I'm doing
comes
my
through.
job.
Exactly. It's so beautiful. Well,
Yeah.
Bailey, it has been so wonderful talking to you about your incredible books, this world you've built that I love. I never want to leave. And one of the important parts of this podcast is I always invite my guests to write and share a love letter, either to their younger self or to their readers. So I would love to turn the episode over to you and hear your love letter.
Okay. To my readers, thank you. Thank you for sharing all of your stories and for feeling safe with me to share your stories. Thank you for sharing my stories with the world. You've really changed my life. I could write the best stories in the world, but without the readers, that it would mean nothing. Because of you, my whole life has changed, and so many other people's whole lives have changed because they've found these books, and now they're finding them in places like Target and Walmart, and they don't even necessarily need to go out of their way to find these stories that are bringing them hope. And we're all of us together are changing lives, and that is just so beautiful, and I'm forever grateful for all of my readers.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. And I
Oh,
appreciate
good.
you kind of giving us that love letter that I
Yeah.
don't know. It just means so much to hear from your favorite writer and to kind of hear what they're thinking. So tell us where we can find you. What's the best way to connect with you, to find out what's next for you?
So I'm on social media as Bailey Hannah Writes on Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Facebook. You can also always email me. I welcome that over DMs because the DMs get a little flooded, but I love to hear, especially when people have those really powerful stories and they feel like I'm a safe place to share them. I absolutely don't want that to just go unnoticed. So I can always be reached at baileyhannahwrites@gmail.com as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah.
Thanks for sitting down and kind of unpacking your books. And I hope you'll come back and talk about At Wit's End because I know we're all
Yes.
excited for that book and to kind of do
Would
more of a
love
deep
to.
dive on that. Great. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Love Letters and Books, a podcast for anyone who loves a good story. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to follow, rate, and review this podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can find me on both Instagram and TikTok at Love Letters and Books. And if you're interested in being a guest on Love Letters and Books, suggesting your favorite author, or just want to write in an original love letter to yourself or someone else to be read on air, please send me an email at lovelettersandmixtapes@gmail.com.